Hi guys, welcome to the Macros Bodybuilding and Powerlifting podcast. I'm very happy to have another episode with Dr. Mike, and we've got your questions to go over and we're going to get you some really good answers. So thank you for sending these all in. I still have some from last time to cover, and we've had some emailed through to me as well, in addition to all the ones posted on there. So the questions are really, really good. So I don't want to skip any. I'll probably not post again and ask for questions for some time so we can get through all of these. So to start off with, we've got Bryce, who is asking, he would like to know a bit more about variation within the training cycle. He's asking about inter-microcycle and then whether there's any microcycle to microcycle and then how that changes over a macrocycle. Kind of missed out the mesocycle. So people who don't know, microcycles normally a week of training. Macrocycle is kind of like, could be a training year. It's a long period of time. Then the mesocycle, which wasn't included, is kind of like a month of training, maybe 4 to 6 weeks of training. So yeah, variation within training, I guess.
That's a broad question.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say I can talk about the general principles behind variation, and why we do it, and then what constrains variation. So vary for several reasons. One of them is to keep adaptive proclivity high. There is an understanding in sports science that training can develop a form of staleness in regards to hypertrophy. You continue to do the same movements all the time, even if you overload them with more weight, more sets, more reps. It is no longer as much of a challenge to the physiology. It's not as homeostatically disruptive. And we know that there's quite a bit of disruption that has to occur for maximum hypertrophy to occur. There's some good reason for varying exercise selection, at least every now and again. In addition to that, there's fatigue management is a good reason for variation. And the idea of stimulus recovery adaptation. You stimulate, then you recover and adapt, then you re-stimulate. Well, a lot of times, fatigue for some systems takes a longer time to come down than fatigue for others. So while your nervous system can take a pretty big hit from a really hard workout, your muscular system might recover quite quickly, and then using a slightly less impactful workout can keep your muscular system stimulated enough to not lose mass for a couple of days while your nervous system heals for the next big workout. So that's another reason to vary itself in different ways across the different time scales, the microcycle, the mesocycle, and the macrocycle. And the most, the foremost kind of variation is within the microcycle. You want to vary some exercise within the microcycle. So if you train several times a week, purely hypertrophic purposes, you probably want different exercises on different days because they hit the musculature from different angles and involve different motor units. And what they do is it's really kind of you get a really cool sort of synergistic effect, or kind of a serendipitous effect, where if you do, let's say, a lot of bench pressing on one day, and then Monday and on Thursday do a lot of incline pressing, your kind of the lower pec fibers and the mid pec fibers get really overloaded during the conventional flat bench press. When you hit the incline bench later, you may actually be training it quite hard, and the clavicular, the upper fibers, get hit a lot, but the middle fibers don't not get hit at all. They get hit a little bit, certainly enough to keep their gains and even possibly speed the recovery. And when you're benching regular the next Monday, the clavicular fibers might get hit to some extent, but a smaller extent. So it's kind of like at any one point, you are really hitting one area, and the next area is much easier, and it comes up and up and up and up and up, just like that. So it promotes both adaptation and a proper amount of recovery, so you can balance the two. So you got to kind of get a best of both worlds. So that kind of exercise variation within the microcycle is a very good idea. And then volume load variation as well. So for example, you can train your legs twice a week, for example, and you can have a day on which quadriceps are really overloaded, lots of volume, lots of relative intensity, and then hamstrings are kind of just back burner to keep their gains. And then the next training day, you do a lot of glute and a lot of hamstring work, but not as much quad work, so that it gives your quads a chance to recover and adapt. And that the intramicrocycle volume intensity variation is the principle behind, or the kind of idea behind DUP, daily undulating periodization. This really isn't a form of periodization, it's a form of programming. Periodization is the whole big picture. And it's a very, very good idea, because if you consistently present the same stimulus, you don't allow for recovery adaptation to occur as much, especially the recovery component, and you can run into really high levels of accumulating fatigue. For example, if you do 5 sets of 5 on Monday of squats, high bar, and then 5 sets of 5 on Thursday, and then 5 sets of 5 next Monday, and then 5 sets of 5 Monday after that, you're stressing that system in the identical way every single time. That particular part of your tendon that gets frayed, that gets damaged from squatting, gets damaged every single time, which after a while can get you hurt. So one of the great reasons to vary is because you don't get hurt nearly as much. You promote recovery adaptation, but you're still banging away at it. So that's how you vary within the microcycle. Between mesocycles, it's probably a good idea to vary exercises somewhat altogether. I don't always recommend rotating. It's actually not clear from the direct scientific literature how often exercise rotation should occur. We have a pretty good guess that if you train for longer than about 3 or 4 months with the same movement, the movements start to decline and it starts to favor other movements. You can still make gains, but they're probably just not going to be as good because there's quite a bit of staleness built up. We also know that due to the principle of directed adaptation, or the sub-principle, it's part of specificity, that if you alter your exercises every single microcycle, you don't probably make as much gain, because muscles seem to retain their gains if you present consistently the same kind of stimulus over and over and over, as opposed to altering it all the time. And then there's just a lot of sort of confusion, for lack of a better term, and the muscles never really grow as much as they could. So I think that there's a kind of a golden zone of exercise variation that is either one every mesocycle, every 2 mesocycles, or every 3 mesocycles. So if someone's at least varying the rep range and the volume load, I don't have a problem with 2 mesocycles in a row of the same exercises. What I typically do is some exercises I vary, some I don't. High bar squats make an appearance in almost all of my mesocycles, but they make an appearance with different intensity ranges. They make an appearance in different parts of the workout. Sometimes they're after deadlift, sometimes they're first, sometimes they're after leg presses. So as long as you're using some kind of variation, you don't need to switch every exercise every month, but it's probably a good idea to do it every 2 to 3 for sure. So, and macrocycle variation, that more should center around your goals. So you can have a macrocycle potentially of where fat loss is the number one concern, a macrocycle of where muscle gain is the number one concern, but all of the minutiae of exercise variables tend to, you're going to get all through all those variants anyway. There's not really a direct answer without looking to goals for what macrocycle variation should look like. And I will say this, on variation, it's possible to make 2 easy mistakes that I can think of right now to refute really quickly. One big mistake people make with variation is, here's our list of exercises that are potentially we can do for, let's say, any muscle group. Let's say the chest. List of chest exercises. Now, the list of chest exercises that is sufficiently overloading to include in our rotation is smaller. It's only out of those chest exercises that we can choose. For example, if we have barbell bench press, dumbbell bench press, dips, weighted push-ups, chest machine, we'll just leave it at that. And then we also have Bosu ball, 1-arm cable fly. That's not an overloading variant. Nobody's going to grow any fucking muscle doing that. So just because it's different doesn't mean it's good. It also has to be good. So when we're talking about the potential, when you start creating a mesocycle, which chest exercises do you use? They all have to be effective variants, which is why a lot of people say to me, for example, they say, Mike, you seem to do a lot of hack squats, lunges, leg presses, and squats, but I don't ever see you doing leg extensions or this one weird movement or like Bulgarian split squats or whatever. Those exercises aren't that great. And because we know that adaptive proclivity for exercise selection rebuilds after a couple of mesocycles, like if you haven't high bar squatted after a couple of mesos, you're pretty damn fresh to that movement. We only need 3 or 4 variants for any muscle group. 5 or 6 is great, but we only really need 3 or 4 to build effective variation within the macrocycle span. So you take your best 5 or 6 exercises for sure, you don't really ever have to go to any of the other ones because the other ones just aren't as effective as variants. It's like picking a cheat meal. You got pizza, you got Chinese, you got, sushi, and those are your top 3 cheat meal foods. You have, let's say, 16 cheat meals in a certain length of time. You just mostly stick to those. They're your favorite foods. But if you're like, ooh, how about Italian food? But you don't really like Italian food, you have to get so bored of everything else that Italian food starts to look good. But that's probably not going to happen, because after you've had pizza and Chinese, now you're really craving sushi because it's been 3 weeks, right? So just because those are your top choices and it's enough variation, it means you don't have to go to the worst choices. Another mistake in variation can be done in 2 particular ways. One, not using variation enough. Some people say that you need to literally run the same exercises for years to get the most effect out of them. Pretty much no bodybuilder has ever trained like that, probably for good reason. And there's, a lot of sports scientists talk about this concept of exercise deletion and replacement. Coaches figured out something like 50 years ago that trading up exercises every now and again spurred new gains in both strength and muscle growth. So some people, there's a very conservative view that you just got to pound the same exercises all the time. One big thing about that is, first of all, you're not going to get your best gains. Second of all, the fatigue accumulation is going to be impressive. And it comes down to this. I was talking with Ian McCarthy about this recently. If you vary the exercises, you don't have to deload as often, because the variants, because they tax different parts of the muscle fiber, et cetera, can let you still train hard, but in a slightly different area of the muscle, tax a slightly different part of the tendon, slightly different force dynamics. And you could still train hard, but not get hurt. However, if you use the same exercise over and over and over and over, you're going to take a lot of distinct deloads, because you're going to get beat up in the same exact way. So there's such a thing as way too much specificity, not enough variation. On the other hand, I think a lot of people use too much variation. That principle of direct adaptation is really important. A lot of bodybuilders will alter exercises every single week. That's probably because they're training so hard in every single session, their fatigue accumulation is really high. And they're using a ton of variation to make up for the fact that they're actually just training too hard. So they avoid the same movements to kind of try to wiggle around that. I don't think it pays off in the end. I think a middle ground is probably best. Is that middle ground switching exercises every month, building up good volume loads, presenting a lot of overload, and then switching? Maybe. Is it every 2? Maybe. Is it every 3? Maybe. And I'm not going to stick my neck out and say it's for sure 1 or for sure 2, for sure 3. I would just be making shit up. Is it more than 4 months? And I really doubt it from a hypertrophy perspective. Should we vary every microcycle? I really doubt it. Both of those would greatly surprise me. So that's kind of how the background behind variation. And to the individual that asked the question, I would say the scientific principles of strength training, we talk plenty about hypertrophy in that book, but just a general definition of variation and how it works is, you have a whole chapter, it's like 30 pages. I would recommend that book to them, because I think it really does answer a lot of questions and lets you read the stuff slowly and really give it some thought versus just hearing it on a podcast.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. That book, I highly recommend it. I recommend it to a lot of people, and anyone who's listened to the podcast and they have questions, often they are really well answered within that book already. I think one point I think you have spoken about before is, and you didn't just touch on it there, was using excess variation kind of within a mesocycle. So basically using all your variants at once. So like someone doing their chest day and they're doing incline, decline, flat, they're doing flies. Basically they use up all their variants. So then they're not they haven't got anywhere to go after that. They just continue bash out all of these. I guess that's also something people want to avoid.
Absolutely, Steve. Good catch. Yeah, I didn't mention that. That's another problem with too much variation. And the thing is there, and so what you're talking about is, okay, I have a chest, priority day, and then later I have like a mini chest, more tricep day in the week. So let's say the frequency is good, but on the chest day, I do, like you said, incline, flat, decline, chest machine, and dips, and dumbbell work. Fuck it. And the thing is, you and I aren't making this up. This isn't one of those like scare tactics politicians use where they conjure up this unrealistic scenario and be like, well, what if aliens come down? We're not prepared for that. Be like, what the hell are you talking about? This shit happens. I mean, every Instagram video of damn near every bodybuilder, 50% of them make this mistake of just having the whole kitchen sink. And per any one mesocycle, that's actually a great way to train, because you hit every single fucking fiber. If you got the most important show of your life coming up in a month, do it all. If you plan on retiring afterwards, you got nothing to save. The question you have to think about is, how am I going to create variation in the next mesocycle? So you don't want to be left with this idea where you fucking used everything already. Be like, I'll do dips. My body's not used to those. Just kidding. It's completely used to those. And then it's just not going to spur the same gains. So if you completely run out of novelty, you're going to have to suck it up for a mesocycle, reduce how many exercises you're doing, not have a very productive mesocycle because you're already used to those exercises to some extent. Just try to get stronger at them and for reps, and then let the other exercises reset in their novelty so that you can use them again. Not a lot of foresight. So, a lot of the very interesting, there's two types of questions that I get every now and again about how do I make gains that leave me with a bit of pause, and it's kind of like a good news, bad news thing. And one of those questions is, I've been doing everything for my chest and it's not growing anymore. What should I do? You got to back off so we can intelligently reprogram stuff. But if you're already doing everything, I don't have any tricks for you. You've used all the tricks, right? And so that's one of those situations where it's tough because the answer is you do have to back off. Another very similar one is, I've been training what I think is above my MRV or very close to my MRV for a long time. What do I do? Back off. And they're like, but won't I lose size? For a little while, you will. And then you'll gain way more of it back. But it's just one of those bitter pills that, hey, you fucked up. Either you used all your variation or you trained way too hard for way too long. And now you're going to have to take one step back, 3 steps forward. But a lot of people, psychologically, very difficult to take one step back. And it can be tough.
Mm-hmm. And I guess something I wanted to ask as well was, because if people do, they're strict, maybe they want to squat kind of through mesocycle to mesocycle and they do it for 4 months. By that time, they're going to have to remove it at some point for a kind of significant degree of a period of time. It has to be removed. Otherwise, everyone's been there where they're stale, and they're going to have to remove it for maybe, I mean, you said 1 or 2 mesocycles. Maybe they don't therefore want to have to stick to it for that period of time. And maybe it does make sense to change it every mesocycle or 2 so that they can bring it back in more frequently. I think a lot of people don't realize that staleness really does settle in, especially for bodybuilders, where they don't have to squat. It's really good, but there's small variants that you can make within that as well. You don't have to do that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a conversation, as I'm sure you're aware, it was recently on, I think, Lyle's Facebook group or something like that, to which I'm not privy because he blocked me a long time ago. And his one of his messengers who was engaging in discussion with me decided he no longer wanted to engage in discussion, mysteriously. I thought it was going quite well, but there was this idea that you got to just pick your exercises, and if you alter them, once a month, that's way too frequently. And I was kind of caricatured in this position of advocating this radically advanced frequency. And there's way too much, or radically advanced variation, way too much variation. And Lyle actually, in one of his little, some people sent me some screenshots, and Lyle in one of his fits of rage said that, no hypertrophy occurs in the first couple of weeks anyway, so it's stupid to do that. Now, that's a completely absurd view. It's completely wrong, because if no hypertrophy occurs with weekly variations of exercises, how the hell are all the biggest people in the world varying their exercises once a week? I mean, and look, pharma works, but pharma won't make you 280 at 5% body fat by itself. It just doesn't do that. It has to be hypertrophy coming from that program. Now, can we say it's suboptimal? We can certainly make that claim. But I would think I was caricatured in a position of really making a very radical claim. My claim is that maybe every 4 to 12 weeks you should vary your exercises. Their claim is, I'm not really so sure what their claim, half those people don't even train. So that's neither here nor there. But, their claim may be, 6 months or 12 months or something like that of the same exercises. That's a fine claim. My claim is intermediate to what is actually done. Is not extreme. Extreme is you vary exercises every single, maybe not even week, like every single session. You have 2 chest sessions a week, and every single time is different. Every single time is different. But that's an extreme sense of variation. I thought my position of every month to 12 weeks of varying exercises was rather conservative, but apparently there's even more conservative opinions out there. I was caught, to be honest, unprepared for that, justifying that, because it was, holy shit, like, I thought I was the one advocating that. I'm used to being the guy that says, you guys are varying too much and here's why. But I was just very unprepared for the accusation of, well, that's way too much variance. Holy shit, like, no one's ever said that to me before. And just to finish that topic and that little discussion, think the primary fallacy there is the reliance on untrained individual studies. It's by no means clear that untrained individuals don't hypertrophy, by the way. And there's some recent research that says they do considerably undergo hypertrophic adaptations within the first 4 to 6 weeks of training. But it is very well known that the nervous system does account for a lot of the strength increases in the first 4 weeks of a program. Of a rank beginner.
Mm-hmm.
Do intermediates not hypertrophy if you alter their exercises over 4 weeks? Bullshit. It's make-believe. There's no evidence for that. And if we look at actual practice in the sport of bodybuilding, which is important, then we see that, it's very difficult to justify that no hypertrophy occurs because these people are gigantic. They're the biggest people in the world. They got to be doing something, at least not completely wrong, right? So maybe it's a fine argument to say more hypertrophy would occur if you varied less. Well, that's okay. I'd like to see some good evidence for that. And not just formal evidence, but real world evidence. I think that's becoming. On a last personal note, because why not? Fuck. It's funny because Lyle got pissed at me once and said that my recommendation of focusing largely on strength or largely on hypertrophy and not mixing the two in a mesocycle for getting stronger is stupid because no actual strong people do that. And if he ever hears this argument of mine that, well, no actually big people do what you say to do, which is to basically never vary exercises or whatever, vary them very infrequently, he's going to be like, well, fucking retarded, and I'm the guy who reads the literature, and I'm smart, and they're stupid, and they're gigantic steroid-abusing retard bodybuilders. But his other argument was in reference to the fact that, well, you're a sports scientist asshole, Dr. Israetel, or whatever. For sure he would call me that, dickhole or something. And all the big guy, all the real strong guys don't do what you say. I mean, it's just kind of like, and it's a frustrating. Lyle is brilliant, right? Mm-hmm. Always insightful. I read his stuff whenever I get the chance. I think he's almost always correct. But unfortunately, when he has a disagreement with someone, he just loses his fucking mind in like a femtosecond, like it's just boom, like sight. And the rest of what he says is oftentimes just total nonsense. He just contradicts himself, and it's unfortunate. But I guess I wanted to address that because it was one of the situations where it was like, I was made to feel like I'm the extremist in that position, in which I don't see it like that at all. So
yeah, and I guess their argument was to do with the fact that like squats are, I guess they're a relatively complicated movement pattern. So if you remove them for a month, and reintroduce them for a month, remove them for a month, reintroduce them. Every time you reintroduce them, you're just getting back used to squatting. But a lot of the variants that would be recommended wouldn't be necessarily completely removing squats. They might be slightly closer stance, slightly wider stance, just a slight variant in that it's not a huge variation. You don't forget. Once you've been lifting for 3+ years, I mean, I don't forget how to squat. I might take me kind of a week to get back into kind of the groove. If the intensity was really different, maybe like a longer period of time, but if the intensity is relatively similar to what I've been doing, and it's just another variant of a squat, I don't feel like it takes me a long time. And then just related to the neurological adaptations, and that's important for strength progression, I guess there becomes a period of time where you're progressing with that movement, but that could just be neurological, a lot of it, because that's important for strength. And then that's, again, against hypertrophy, and you want to actually get rid of that efficiency at some point.
Perhaps, the efficiency arguments are by no means clear in either way. What we're actually talking about here is there's a trade-off between staleness that develops with exercises used too long and overemphasizing the novelty and never really getting any traction, any good work, any good overload, because everything is always so shocking and new. Your body just tries to make neural adaptations and perhaps doesn't even have time to develop a lot of good hypertrophy.
Yeah,
that's a fine point. But to make the claim that you have to grind shit out for 6 months at a time or a year at a time, and that changing every mesocycle or every 2 or 3 is too often, man, you're going to have to provide some extraordinary evidence for that claim, because we have bodybuilders that change exercises every single microcycle that make, I don't know, the best gains on the planet. And maybe they could be getting better gains by keeping exercises in for longer. But that's by no means clear. And there is no addressing of staleness in that situation. Real big, strong people cannot do the same exercise for a very long time because they fucking break in half after a while. They have to vary the exercise because, first of all, it stops getting you stronger. And second of all, it will get you hurt, right? So a lot of the times, the reason people make variations in training even more often than they want is because something starts beating them up too much. So I think there's a middle ground there. And I think that middle ground was a little bit lost in that discussion. Is that middle ground closer to 12 weeks? Maybe. Is it closer to 4 weeks? Maybe. I think that's all pretty reasonable. Anything much longer than that and much shorter than that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, and I'm always open to, maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but I certainly don't see how my position is ridiculous. And then the reliance on data from completely untrained individuals to try to make a grand point about trained individuals is junior mistake. And Lyle knows that, but he's too pissed to admit it. And if he's never going to fucking admit it. I don't know if you've ever seen his discussions on steroids with Greg Nuckols. I mean, it was just like a gigantic, where he would just give Greg the opinion he thought Greg should have, refute that opinion, and Greg was like, I never actually said that. And Lyle was like, you're a piece of shit. Fuck you. You're a fraud. And I was just like, all right. So not super productive, to say the least.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, there is extreme approaches to take that you shouldn't take, and then there's the middle ground, which is what you've explained there, and people get good results with both. So people can kind of go to their preferences at that point, because I mean, adherence is important.
You bet. And it's just not clear what the correct answer is, but I don't think either one of those even more extreme positions is just clearly fucking totally wrong. You have to be a total retard to subscribe to it.
Awesome. Right. I think we did really well on that question. Let's get to the next one. So Jonathan, I'm going to say his last name wrong, but he came to the seminar, Vermeulen.
Vermeulen, maybe?
So he's asked how to identify weak points for powerlifting.
Man, I've had, I think I've answered this question on a couple of other podcasts, and I've definitely answered it on my Facebook. Okay. But the easiest way to identify weak points is to compare your assistant's exercise performance to that of other lifters of similar caliber on the main lifts. I think that's the first place to go, because kind of like analysis, like, well, my back does this, so it's obviously my back. Well, it could be because your glutes don't start in the right position, and then you end up relying on your back too much, and your back's actually strong, but your positioning's off, blah, blah, blah. Gets to be a little bit complicated. So I think the best way to analyze weak points and then how to improve them is a wholly different discussion that I've talked about relatively often. So for example, let's say you bench 100 kilos for a max, and you close grip 95 kilos for a max, and your best friend or several of them also bench several of your friends, or you look at a lot of Instagram videos, for example, even better because you get a huge sample. You look at 20 Instagram videos of people you follow that bench about 100 kilos. Some bench 90, some bench 110, everything in between. And you look at their assistance exercises. Most of them struggle to close grip bench 80 kilos. You're blasting 95. Can you conclude that your triceps are a weak point? Almost certainly not. Then you look at their overhead pressing. You can overhead press 60 kilos, and they overhead press 55, some guys 65, some guys 60. Okay, pretty average overhead press. It's not the front delts that are holding you back. Then you look at their chest flies and maybe their wide grip work. Your wide grip work is like 60 kilos crushes you. Your pack flies, 10 kilos in each hand for sets of 10 blows you up. They're doing 15 kilos. Some of the guys are doing 20 kilos in each hand, and their wide grip work is 20 kilos above yours. You have a weak chest. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. So I think using the assistance work that more better reflects some muscles than others is a real good place to start. And, it's one of those things you can actually do that in bodybuilding too. Usually bodybuilding is easy to spot weak points because you can just see them, but usually it's confirmed by exercises. For example, like in my personal case, my back is like thick as fuck. Or lats could be wider. And as far as pull-ups and pull-downs, I'm just not that good at them. It's just nothing exceptional. Like, I'm okay, but it's nothing crazy. But bent rows, I can fucking bent row the earth if it came down to it. So it makes sense, right? You're like, okay, that makes sense. So in bodybuilding especially, weak points and stuff, it's really, if you want a complete physique, especially later in your career, it's fun to train your strong points. It's not so much fun to train your weak points a lot of times. But when you look at like, okay, what am I shitty at? Probably a good idea to do that if you're advanced already. And for powerlifting, if you have weak points and you're already advanced enough to start looking at them, because beginners should be worrying about weak points. They should be training everything. Intermediates should be training mostly strong points. But if you're advanced, yeah, I mean, like if there's an exercise that you like watch other people do, and you're like, oh my God, like I totally suck at that exercise. That might be what's holding you back, and that can come into program design. And a lot of times, once you find your weak point, it's really easy to see how it reflects itself in your lift. So, guys will have great hip position, great knee position, great chest position. They'll start a deadlift, their hips shoot up, their quads lock out, and then their back does one of these question mark things where it unrounds. And then you look at back exercises, like maybe bent rows. You've got to keep that tight back for a while. You try bent rows. Your buddies are doing bent rows with 100 kilos for reps. You try bent rows with 80 kilos, and your arms are strong enough. Like you could pull the bar, but you start rounding over and you can't put your position halfway through the row. You got a fucking weak back, and there's no two ways about it. So then you can do exercises that strengthen your back. Bent rows are a good idea. Some block pulls are a good idea. Stiff-legged deadlifts with a big arch are a good idea to try to get that back stronger. So I think that looking at, the main point, looking at those assistance exercises related to how much other people are doing, pretty good start.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I just asked because we have actually done a podcast on weaknesses, how to train for weak points in powerlifting, but I don't think we actually addressed that specific question. So I think that was really, really good. And sorry if you'd covered it before, but
very cool. No.
We've helped some new people out and cemented it in some people's heads who love just listening to every single thing you say.
Well, geez, I hate listening to myself, so I'm glad someone wants to listen to what I've done now.
Cool. So we have a question from Zafar, who's asked, where do you fit overhead pressing within a hypertrophy program? The front delts,
go ahead.
He's just saying, if the front delts get enough stimulus from benching, the lateral delts need more specific isolation, like lateral raises, upright rows. Is an overhead press necessary? Does it provide something beneficial for a hypertrophy?
It's a good question. I don't think it's very necessary for most people. Brad Schoenfeld made a post saying, the dedicated front delt work is kind of absurd in most cases because people have, very well developed front delts from all the pressing. And people jumped on his throat for some damn reason. It was completely correct. It's an uncontroversial point.
Yeah.
So overhead pressing is one of those things. Here's how I integrate into my program. What I do is I have, priority days for pushing either horizontal or vertical in the week. And one of those will be heavy tricep emphasis and one of them will be heavy chest emphasis. And it all rotates within each other. So my vertical pressing can be incline dumbbells, incline barbells, incline close grip barbell, a variety of a seated overhead press or standing overhead press. So basically I'll do standing overhead presses or seated overhead presses once every 3 mesocycles, maybe once every 4. That's not all the time. This is by no means all the time. And that's any kind of overhead press. So now for me personally, my chest is so easy to train and I'm so good at overhead pressing that I'll do it more often than that. But if I was the average individual, I'd spend more time training my chest and less time doing overhead work because the chest training does hit the front delts enough. So the answer to that is, I think, Zafir's his initial kind of his initial suspicion that overhead pressing isn't really super necessary. I totally agree with that. I think people make a big mistake. And this is a really common mistake that's been pissing me off for like pretty much forever. And I'm glad I get a chance to rant on the issue. Almost every bodybuilder's shoulder day, which is fucking stupid to have a shoulder day, but that's neither here nor there, starts with some kind of overhead press, like seated dumbbell dildo press, where, you do the fucking halfway dumbbell bullshit. And you're like, oh my God, fuck shoulder day, blew me up. Why the fuck are you starting with your strongest point already? And guys will say, they'll step on stage and they'll say, my rear delts are a weakness. And you look at their plan and it all starts with front delts. What the hell's wrong with you? Start with rear delts. So what I do when I train shoulders, which I train 4 times a week, I do usually some rear delt work. Then I usually do side delt work or just side or just rear. I don't do anything else because my front delts are big enough. And if my rear delts ever start to outpace my front delts, holy shit, what an awesome problem to have. and bringing up front delts is easy. So, people start their workouts with front delt with some kind of press all the time. I mean, just think that's a total fucking waste of time. You're better off starting with barbell upright rows, with face pulls, with lateral raises, with rear laterals, to really give yourself that capped and rounded look, which only comes from big side delts and big rear delts. And big front delts, look, if you bench press enough, you'll have big front delts. You may be genetically weak in the front delts, and you might have to train them more, but then you're 1 out of every 50 people or something like that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think you answered that really well. And yeah, I completely agree with Brad, the hypertrophy expert, and everyone's disagreeing that it just didn't make any sense to me either. So.
Funny. Mm-hmm.
Next question we have from Thomas, who emailed me, and it's quite a long question, but I whittled it down to basically talking about MRV, and that he has a very stressful job that's many, many hours. And he's wondering where he called it specifically kind of a mental exhaustion element of MRV, which I found really interesting that you brought this up, because it's within the next article that you'll be reading over mine, that hopefully you'll kind of say something similar to what I've said there.
What's his question?
Basically, he's saying, can kind of life stress, work stress, impact your training MRV?
100% yes. The best athletes in the world, the Bulgarians, for example, lived in training camps coming up to big competitions where their daily responsibilities included lifting, eating, taking drugs, and getting massages. And that's it. There was no stress. Every good coach, good sports scientist will tell you to minimize external stress. Like my PhD supervisor used to say, fatigue is cumulative, and the source of the fatigue is really very secondary to the magnitude of the fatigue. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, stress at work can impact your training. It will lower your actual physical MRV. Did you hear me on that? Because my audio went. Great. It will lower your MRV. You got 2 choices. Well, some combination of 2 things have to be done about that. One is you have to try to make your work as little stress as possible, which a lot of times just starts up here with psychology. Just do a good job at work. You don't have to stress out about stuff. Stress is an ancestral, completely outdated response. It's fight or flight. It's designed for literally the jungle. It's pointless in an office building because you can't kill anyone, hopefully, and you can't fight them. You can't run. They don't let you come back to work if you just run away one day. They said you probably can't work there anymore. So you stare at a computer screen. You got like emails to respond to. Getting crazy about that and be like, "Fuck, I Jim from accounting. Fuck Jim, I hate him." You can't do any of this. There's no release. So just breathe, relax, and just do a good job. And don't stress and worry because it's pointless. Outside of that kind of stress management and making sure you take some good relaxing time through the day, at the end of the day, especially to wind down, making sure you get good sleep, do as much of that as you can, and that'll boost your MRV as much as possible. But because you have a stressful job, because you don't live on an island in the Bahamas and have no worries at all, your MRV from the ideal range is going to be lower. If you say, I don't give a fuck stress, I'm going to train hard anyway, you're now training above your MRV, and you're going to pay for it. Stress is cumulative. And if you look and say, so what you're saying is, if I have a real job and I have a stressful situation, I can't recover from as much training and I shouldn't train as much? Yes. Mm-hmm. And people try to say, but what's a workaround? There's no workaround. Oh, wait, high doses of anabolic androgenic steroids are a workaround. But unless you like to ruin your life and have even worse stress response and shorten your lifespan with all kinds of health problems, don't do that. You know what I mean? So it's just a perfect example of a situation where here are the constraints, do your best. And this is something, I think I've ranted about this before recently because it's been really getting to me. I think it's very noble and very good that people are always looking at ways of obviating problems. They're looking for the ability to put in the most minimal effort and get the most maximum result. And this is very noble, and they should keep always doing that. But when the facts of the matter are in, when your best analysis tells you, here are the constraints, continuing to try to look for little ways out of it is a fool's errand. At some point, you have to accept that your life isn't ideal for the development of hypertrophy. and you have to make adjustments in other areas. Otherwise, you'll pay an even worse cost, right? So it's one of those situations. Here's a quick analogy. You're driving to the grocery store to get some really good food, and then you're going over to a business meeting. Your boss texts you and he says, business meeting's an hour earlier than you thought. Sorry, the guy from the fucking other firm just came in early, and he's a big client. You got to come and talk to him. You're like, fuck, I need food. And you see a fast food restaurant, and you know that fast food restaurant coming up in a fucking block. It's the only chance you'll get to get food. Is that ideal? No, of course not. What's the alternative? Just driving to the grocery store and losing your job? Of course not. So it doesn't matter how much you would like for the alternative to be true. There are no tricks. There are no fucking life hacks. There are no workarounds. You go to the fucking McDonald's or whatever, and you eat there, or you get, drive-through stuff, and, you bite in the burger and it squirts mayonnaise and ketchup on your fucking shirt, the usual, right? So, but the guy knows you're seriously dedicated to eating, and you show up with something on your shirt. He's like, he's a bodybuilder too. He's like, damn, I know what's up. So, but I mean, and a lot of times people will look at the equivalent of that situation in fatigue management and in training volume and say, but how do we work around that? Well, you don't have a fucking teleport machine. You don't work around it. You work within the constraints that the situation gives you. So to the writer of the email, I'm sorry for the kind of mixed news, but yeah, outside of reducing your stressors and trying to recover better, you will have to reduce how much you train if you want the best possible results. Could you be better if you trained more and could recover? Yeah, totally, but that's in an ideal world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important for people to realize that, because I definitely have some clients who are, maybe they're at uni, so they have nights out and things, and I can't lie to them and tell them that it's absolutely fine and it won't impact their results at all if they get no sleep for like 2 nights of the week. It's definitely going to impact things, but you just have to, I think it's better being aware, and I think he'll thank you for being aware that it's meant to impact things, and that there is a reason his performance isn't as good as maybe some other times when stress is high outside of kind of life stress.
Totally.
Awesome. So we have a nice question here, and I think I kind of spoke to you about this before, and Derek Dixon has asked, what are the best ways to track progress in bodybuilding / hypertrophy training? Do you keep circumference measurements? Do you track PRs in the 8 to 12 rep range? Or do you just track steady weight gain while controlling leanness and taking photos?
Yeah. Some of these things are things I do, but I can't rule out that I'm not doing the best things. I think tracking circumference is a good idea, but it's useless within the realm of the mesocycle because your instruments aren't that precise. As you get much more advanced, it's completely useless because you don't make huge gains like that. It's going to take you 2 years to have a noticeable, a centimeter on your biceps in 2 years is really good. And you think, well, no, I can track a centimeter. Do you put the tape in the exact same spot every time? Do you have the exact same magnitude of pump every time? Do you have the exact same magnitude of intramuscular carbohydrate stores every time? No, so it gets really tough. Mm-hmm. If you measure your circumference every week on the same day for 3 or 4 body parts, it's a laborious practice, but after several months and years of data, you're going to have a very good handle on what's going on. And I think that's totally fine. The circumference doesn't obviate for fat versus muscle gains, however, and that tends to be a little bit of a problem. So like Derek said, and I correctly hinted at, some kind of body composition analysis should be there as well. The mirror is a pretty good guide. I have several ab veins now, which is kind of trippy to say on camera. Mm-hmm. And when the ab veins start to go away, I know I'm not in such a great shape anymore. When I do a mini cut and they come back, I know I'm rocking it, right? Stuff like that, you'll notice markers on your physique for when you're fatter. That, combined with body weight, is a pretty good measurement of progress. So let's say you weigh, 70 kilos, and you can see all of your abs. In 6 months, you came back to the same part of your cycle, you're again at the end of the cut, you weigh 73 kilos, and your abs are at least as sharp as they've ever were. You're making progress. Yeah. Right? And the important take-home message about these tools to use, don't ever just use one of them. Use the mirror and the scale, and maybe some circumference measurements too, as a good guide. One of my mentors, actually, Broderick Chavez, Team Evil GSP on Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
His the evil genius, right? And he really is a fucking genius. Broderick's watching this. Broderick, fuck you. It's a it's hopefully an inside joke, but in any case, he lives actually pretty close to me, so he's going to come kick my ass if he hears this. So Broderick is a really big fan of skin fold measurements, just taken at one or two sites, like an abdominal skin fold. You can buy a skin fold caliper by yourself. If you take it in the exact same spot, like right next to your belly button, you take skin fold twice a week, every week of your entire progression. It takes like literally 5 seconds. You just write down the number of millimeters. That's a pretty good tracker of body fat. It doesn't tell you what body fat percent you are because of your deposition and differences. Some people store a lot of fat in their legs, a lot in their lower back, a lot in their love handles, and dick in their abs. They're going to say, great, I'm 5% fat. No, you're not, motherfucker. You're 12% fat. But it's a 5 millimeter skin fold. When you're up at 8 millimeters, you know you're getting fatter than usual. When you're down to 3 millimeters, you know you're leaner than usual. Yep. So if you weigh 100 kilos and your skin fold is lower than it ever was, and the last time it was that low was 95 kilos, you're making progress. There's no other way around that. You're making progress. And it takes some honesty to make sure you're doing it in the right place and not bullshitting yourself. But if you do it relatively often, you can only lie to yourself so much, right? Mm-hmm. So that's another good method to try. And I saved the best for last. Repetitions of 6 to 15. It's a big range, but it depends on fiber type, et cetera, exercise. With a certain weight or a certain rep number, let's say 10, and how much weight you can do for that on the compound basics is a fucking phenomenal progress for hypertrophy. If you get stronger for your 1RM, there's ways to neurologically tweak that. Your nervous system can continue to get stronger in 1RMs for a long time. And if you do 1RM training all the time, it doesn't actually hypertrophy you much. The body's adaptation to very high resistance, low time interval forces is actually not really hypertrophy. It's mostly nervous system adaptation. So if your 1RM goes up, you could just be very well practiced. And that's not a very good gauge of how jacked you are. If your 12RM goes up, after several months of getting used to the exercise, there's nothing more the nervous system can help you with. It's pure size. You're either bigger or you're not. You can look at this velodrome cyclists, for example. They're in that lactic acid accumulation range. They're in that high volume range. Their legs are fucking enormous. You can't nervous system your way into winning a fucking velodrome cycling match. At some point, to just produce that much fucking repetitive energy, you need big muscles, period. So if you used to squat 150 kilos for sets of 10 or a max set of 10, and then later you squat 170 or 180 for a set of 10, there's no trick. As long as you're already well-trained, you got bigger. There's no way around that. So for example, if you want to drop a weight class and still have the same 1 rep maxes, that's sometimes kind of possible because your nervous system can come up. But if you're doing something where, it's sets of 10 and you're like, okay, I'm going to drop down 20 kilos and still do that sets of 10, people are going to be like, that's not going to work, man. You need to be fucking big to do that, which is like strongman, a lot of lifting for reps. Who are the best strongmen in the world? They literally weigh 190 kilos, 200 kilos. It takes that much muscle to do sets of 10. So how do I know my back's the biggest it's ever been? Photos, details in my back at a certain body weight, and also earlier this year, I bent rode what would be 315, 145 kilos, I think, around 145. I bent rode that for 4 sets of 10. Strict, and I'll say something about strict in just a second. There's no way any other version of me ever could have done that. That's not like a lucky day. That's like way outside of anything I've ever done. Mm-hmm. And because the nervous system adaptations are already on the money for years, it's just size at that point. There's no way if you told me, hey, Mike, are you going to bent row, 155 kilos for sets of 10? My response to you would be like, if that ever happens, when that happens, I'm going to have a big fucking back. I'm going to have a bigger back. So tracking for reps is a real good idea. So don't worry about singles too much. Like if you're 10 reps, if you want big ass side delts and your upright row sets of 10 haven't gone up in months, you don't reliably have bigger side delts, because when you do have bigger side delts, you can upright roll a lot. It's just the way it works, especially for reps. Strictness. It's real easy once people figure out that rep strength correlates to size for them to try to get some real funky business with their technique so that they can pretend they got bigger. It has to be strict. When you constrict technique your way to more reps, you're bigger and you're stronger, and there's no lying to yourself. But if you look back at a shoulder press set and be like, I usually touch my clavicle, but this time I came a little bit high in a couple, but oh, I'm probably still bigger. Probably. Do you want to walk around the rest of the day thinking you're probably still bigger? Or do you want the harsh reality that you're not bigger and you need to make the adjustment? Because you have two choices. One, realize or pretend that you actually got bigger when clearly there's no evidence for that, and continue doing the same stuff that hasn't been working, or swallow the bitter pill and understand that what you've been doing hasn't been working, reevaluate your plan, and then more than likely you'll be on to better gains, right? People say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, but if it's broke, fix it. And if you don't detect how broken it is by lying to yourself, by wigging, little partial reps here, not going as deep in the squat, then you're lying to yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so all of these methods require quite a bit of honesty. Outside of body weight, that should just, you step on the scale, there it is, right? So always track your body weight. You can track body fat and circumference. That's totally cool. But for me, what are indispensable? Body weight. My camera's reversed. Body weight, leanness, or how you look in the mirror, and rep strength. If your body weight's going up, you're not super fat, and your rep strength is going up, you're getting jacked, and there's no two ways about it. If one of those isn't adding up, you might be getting jacked. Maybe not. If two of those are adding up, you're not getting jacked.
Cool.
What do you think about that?
No, yeah, I like that. And I think it's something I have found difficult myself, and people might be able to relate to this, so I think it might be interesting, is that I haven't been able to squat for a decent amount of time. And so my actual squat strength, I'm not even sure where it would be right now, because I haven't been able to maximally push that element of my training. And so it gets kind of, at times you get worrisome that I haven't gained. But then, like you said, you take other pictures. And recently I had a look at my mini cut from last year compared to this year, looked at the level of leanness and the body weight, and I was a good kind of 6 pounds heavier. And I remember tagging you on Facebook, and it's having that tracking. And I think people feel narcissistic sometimes for taking photos of themselves. But I mean, we both do it all the time. It's part of our social presence and things, but it's actually helpful for us as well. Like, I take them and put them out there so that kind of it keeps me accountable as well.
You bet. One thing you don't want, and I've had this happen every now and again, is you take a picture and you don't even share it to Instagram because you're like, I look like shit. Like, the less often that happens, the more you are in the right track. And sometimes you don't have to keep formal track of stuff. Sometimes you just know. Yeah. Like, after this last cut, when I started remassing again, and it still happens all the time. Like, there's been several times when, that last picture I posted, which is me looking like a superhero or something, when I was in the locker room to take those series of pictures, the reason I took the series of pictures is because I had trained in that same gym like a week before, and I walked by on my way to take a shower by that mirror, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I ran out of room on my body for more muscle. It was great lighting, and I was just like, I've never in my life looked like this. And I look back at some older pictures, and I was like, this person looks untrained. If you look back at older pictures and you think, man, I looked great, and you look at pictures now and you're like, I don't know. You got some serious reevaluating to do. So in the long term, years, you can just tell. You can just tell, and there's no question to be asked. Over months, etc., rep tracking, etc., the formal stuff, really, really good idea.
And I also just want to add that I think some people need to really take home the message of solid technique, in that I know a lot of my clients, and I know a lot of people who maybe they haven't actually got stronger, but their form is so much better, as in like range of motion, time under tension, they're not bouncing things. And that as well is an indicator of progression. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And you see that stuff all the time. I used to do, and I remember I did like quarter squats with 675 pounds for a set of 9. And the day after, my knees hurt, nothing else hurt. And I was like, that was dumb, and I never did that shit again. I've never squatted that much since then, but I've done stuff in the mid 400s, full pauses, slow eccentrics, to where you really just have to ask yourself the question, could you a year from now with that strict of technique do that? Like if me from 3 years from now walked in on a guy in the gym doing, what did I do, like 420 pounds or 430 I did for 4 sets of 8 slow eccentric full pause squats.
Yeah.
If I saw that, I'd be like, fuck. And somebody'd be like, can you do that? I'd be like, man, I don't think so. That guy's fucking jacked. That's a really good sign, right? And that's why it's cool to track PRs and make sure you have a structure to your training, because if you're always fucking with your technique, if you never track anything, like you see bodybuilder workouts where it's like they just keep adding plates to the bar, they don't count anything, you don't write anything down.
Yeah.
How the fuck do you know you're getting bigger? How the fuck do you know that? How do you know you're getting stronger? You don't. And how do you know how to program stuff later? Well, I leg pressed 1,000 for 8 reps, but it was like down halfway. And then later you like find out your technique sucks, or somebody makes you go lower, and now you're leg pressing 700 again. What do you tell yourself? But if you always have really good technique, over the years, it really is something that can stay really consistent.
And do you think on that element of the people who don't track things formally, do you think there's potentially the fact that they always push hard and that they are maybe not tracking it formally, but because they're always giving their body a big stress, they can still progress? And maybe kind of if you don't formally track things like the tooth and nail, as long as you're providing your body enough fatigue and you're feeling as it is difficult, can that still provide the body kind of enough stimulus to progress?
Absolutely. As long as you're training hard, tracking is secondary. But guys who track might be able to score a couple of places higher at a bodybuilding show than guys who don't. Might be able to score 30, maybe 15 kilos more on the platform in powerlifting. I mean, is 15 kilos a different lifter? No. But he's the winner, and you've got a 3rd place medal, and you want to fucking throw it out in the street. So tracking helps. It's not everything. Training hard is most of it. But if you want to train your hardest in the most systematic manner and have the assurance that what you're doing is working at the best that you can be, track.
Mm-hmm. And there's another, just to beat this one to death, I've got one other way I'm thinking. Volume PRs. So being able to do a weight with a certain number of sets and a certain number of reps that you haven't been able to do, would that be an indicator of progression? Effectively, I guess your MRV is bigger.
Absolutely. And especially that certain amount of weight for a certain number of sets and reps. Like you may be able to have squatted 180 kilos for a set of 10 before. And then after it would have been like a set of 6, then a set of 3, and then you completely degrade. But if you can do 180 for 4 sets of 10, 6 or 8 months later, you're stronger, you're probably bigger, because if you can handle more volume and keep the intensity, then there's just no other way around it. You're just better, and likely it's very likely size related. Absolutely.
Cool. We got time for one more question.
Cool. I just had to plug my phone in to charge it.
Oh, okay.
So sorry about the angle differences.
No worries.
All right, hit me.
Cool. Last one. So we've got Rod from New York. And he's asked for you to talk about recovery protocols aside from sleep and good nutrition. What are your thoughts on cryotherapy, steam rooms, ice baths, what's it called? He's said bulbs, what Michael Phelps used, but it was the suction.
Yeah. Suction's fucking stupid. We can just cover that one really quick. It's fucking ridiculous. Pre-scientific. I don't know what the fuck it does. I'll be very surprised if it did anything beneficial. I certainly wouldn't put stock into it. With ice and heat is a trade-off. Ice and heat tend to reduce the inflammatory processes. Inflammatory processes do 2 things. They cause additional fatigue, so bring with them adaptation. There's some good idea to think that inflammation is a symptom of the adaptive process. It's a best analogy would be like, after a hurricane, you get a skyscraper and the windows have been broken a bit, the paint is chipped off. If you invite a crew of workers in to replace the windows, you can't have workers in the office at the same time because the windows are open, right? There's 50-mile-an-hour winds going through the office. There's no papers, the printer's going to fall over. So the workers to fix the windows are kind of the inflammatory process. They make shit temporarily less workable, but in the long term, they make the windows better, they fix the paint, and the skyscraper adapts. It's better for that. If you have a hurricane and you don't invite the workers in, you still have sort of functioning windows. And because the workers never come in, your skyscraper doesn't get any worse, okay? But it won't make the adaptations. So inflammation, tends to be pretty critical to recovery and adaptation processes. If you're peaking for something, if you're very close to peaking, and you need to perform at these workouts, these last couple of workouts, or if you need to perform at the meet, doing heat and ice, if you're too sore or too fucked up, can be a big advantage. It really can. Because you're saying, look, I'm already strong enough. I just need to be on. And I can't be carrying this fatigue. Fatigue is a cool trade-off if it makes you better. But if you don't have any time for that stuff, then it's really a bad deal, right? Mm-hmm. So for peaking, fine. For regular training, especially for hypertrophy, I would stay away from icing. I would stay away from heating. I would just stick to sleep, food, and stress management. Cool. Make sure you're relaxed. Program design, having light days, recovery sessions, stuff like that. Doing a little bit of cardio. That's the good stuff. Chiropractic, I don't know what to say about chiropractic. Some chiropractors are good doctors and they help you. Mm-hmm. A lot of chiropractors are playing make-believe. They think they can cure the common cold with cracking your neck. It feels good sometimes. I literally know people personally that have been injured by chiropractors.
Wow.
So the fact chiropractic it doesn't recover you at all. I would put that into the camp of injury control, injury management, which isn't the same thing as recovery. And I would call chiropractic mostly questionable. And if it does offer some advantages, it's a very minority of chiropractors. Most of the chiropractic profession is unfortunately unscientific.
Awesome. No, I think you answered that question really well. And I am going to hold back on the other questions. We've still got plenty to get through another time, but we don't want to keep everyone here too long. Don't want to keep Mike here too long. So yeah, thank you very much for answering all those, Mike.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I can't wait to answer some more within the next couple of weeks.
Sweet. So cheers, guys. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you soon. Take care.